Okay, welcome everyone. It is 5:30 and I will call this policy committee meeting to order. Ms. Shope, may I please have a roll call?
Yes. Greg Schneider,
Present.
Spencer Anderson,
Present.
Amy Levy.
Here.
All members are present.
Thank you. All right, just want to note that we will have a hard stop at 6:40, so Dr. Garrison and the rest of the staff can transition to the ad hoc committee meeting. So whatever remains on our agenda at that point, we will postpone until our January meeting. So before I ask for a motion to approve the agenda, I would like to add policy 362 for review. It's posted and hopefully everyone's had a chance to look at it. It's just not listed on the agenda. So we'll follow our current practice of reviewing policies in like sets. And then I'd also like to reverse the order of B and A. I want to make sure that we do a first read of policy 811.1, and then we'll go right into policy 761 wellness and begin with the presentation. If those edits are acceptable to committee members, could I have a motion to approve?
I move to approve with the adjustments.
Second.
All right, there's a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
All right, that motion passes unanimously. Thank you, everyone. Is there a motion to approve the minutes from our November 2nd Policy Committee meeting?
So moved.
Second.
All right, there's a motion and a second. Is there any discussion concerning the minutes from our November 2nd meeting? Hearing none, all in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
All right, that motion passes unanimously as well. So that is going to bring us to policy 811.1. Before we go into review, I just wanted to make a couple notes. We'll review and receive feedback, but I want to be intentional about not making any decisions on this brand new policy until we can offer an opportunity for our staff, family, and community input. So I'm recommending that at our January 4th meeting that we dedicate 1 hour to receive feedback. And Dr. Garrison, if you and your staff could work to get the word out about that opportunity for public comment, because that's not typically what happens in committee. We usually save that for the full board. We just want to make sure that, again, students, staff, family, community members that may want to serve as advocates or learn more about the role or provide input have an opportunity to do feedback. Ms. Shope, for our January meeting, could you, as is our practice, could you include policy 811 for review so we can have that alongside 811.1? And then I just want to thank Ms. Mortek for doing the work necessary to bring this policy to committee and ultimately to the full board. So much appreciated. Dr. Garrison, before we begin review, do you have any comments or reflections on intentionally engaging the community in this policy?
Sure. I think it's very important that, when we're thinking about advocacy, we want all points of view to be heard. One of the things that I truly believe in is that when we are speaking on behalf of all of us, we can actually have some greater impact on the outcomes that we're trying to achieve. I also like to say, when you are, and I'm just going to make this statement in general, whenever you are advocating for whatever, it oftentimes doesn't mean that you're going to necessarily get what you want that you're advocating for. I think that's just a note that I need to put into this conversation. Everyone can advocate, for whatever you truly believe should happen as it pertains to student achievement. And that's kind of where I want a lot of the thoughts to kind of float towards, I should say. How is it going to impact student achievement? And again, everyone has the voice. Everyone should have a voice, and especially from an advocacy perspective. I just want to make sure that I noted that, again, you can advocate naturally, but it doesn't mean that what you're advocating for, you're going to actually get. So I want to just add that as a note. Thank you for allowing me to speak.
Absolutely, anytime, and thank you for highlighting that important point. And I think I feel comfortable in speaking for everyone involved in this policy that the intentionality is to make sure people feel heard. And again, you don't always get exactly what you advocate for, but we definitely want anyone who's involved with our district, our students, to make sure that they have a voice and that they are consistently being heard by the district. All right. With that being said, we'll follow our normal protocol. Board Member Schneider, I will start with you. I will go to Board Member Anderson, and then I will save my questions and comments for this policy for last. So Committee Member Schneider, any questions, additions, or edits?
As I read through the policy, the end of that first paragraph, it says that family members are expected to designate only one advocate in a given situation. We cannot limit the number of advocates in IEP or reevaluation meetings. Everything that I have read on the national and state site always puts an S on the end, so advocates. In some situations, the documentation even has a list of 5 or 6 people that they may want to include. So I think we need to add something to the end of that first sentence, or that last sentence, in any given situation, except for IEP, individual education plan, or IEP meetings.
Important point. Can you help me? Where are you seeing that it limited it? And I have a similar note,
Right.
but limits it to one advocate.
Well, it's the last sentence in that first paragraph. It says, unless unique circumstances are present, family members are
Got it.
expected to designate only one given advocate in a given situation, which I agree, in most situations, that's probably a good idea. But in special ed law, does not allow us to limit the number of advocates.
Perfect. Thank you for highlighting that. Board Member Anderson, do you have any questions, edits, or additions? Oh, okay.
I have nothing to add.
Please forgive me, Board Member Anderson. I'm hogging the mic there. All right, I will walk through my comments and make sure that we include your input. And again, this is just for discussion. This will come back at January, and then we will be prepared to take action once we've heard from our community member. So in that first sentence where it says family members, and I bring this up because I was aware of a situation that happened in the district before. What about employees who are engaging with the district for any number of reasons, and they would like to have an advocate with them? Would you like to have a separate, like a 811.2 for employees, or are you comfortable with covering them under this policy?
Thank you. I think for this piece, this did come from a concerned community member just wanting to know about advocates, but I think that's a really good point. So do you see as a staff member, when they have the parent hat on, that if they're wearing the parent hat, then that they could be included in this policy and bring an advocate?
No, the way I was looking at it was if I'm a staff member and I am involved in some type of hearing, maybe it's a disciplinary hearing or some type of meeting with the district, and I want to bring in not legal representation, but an advocate with me. I don't know if there are already existing rules to cover an employee that wants to bring in an advocate when they're dealing.
Okay, thank you. I'll let Dr. Garrison kind of comment on that. Thank you.
No problem. So typically, whenever there's a advocate coming with an employee, we then get our legal representation involved, and so we can't necessarily stop someone from wanting to bring an advocate, but we then get our legal representation involved, and so it kind of, because we don't want to put ourselves in a place where we may be in the wrong or they may be in the right. So we want to make sure we are clear in our expectations.
No, absolutely. And I think it would be prudent to cover that under policy. So I guess my next question is, do you feel like that is different enough that that should be in 811.2? Or are you comfortable with, and we can kind of let this sit and you can get back to us and we can handle it when we do our edits in January. But I just wanted to raise that question, if this policy is broad enough to cover students and families and also employees.
I think we need to separate the two.
Separate?
Yeah.
Okay. So is it a realistic timeline? And it can be very similar but detailed to employees. Would we be able to address that at our January 4th meeting? Or would you like to do the advocates for students and families and then maybe push that, the 811.2, it sounds like it would be, to February?
So I think we should definitely, thank you for bringing the question.
Yep.
I think we should definitely move forward with the family and student piece.
Yep.
And then the next one should be staff. And so that should be in January, like your first statement. We don't have to wait till February. For
Okay.
that. Because there may be something in HR that already touches on the advocacy.
Right.
From an HR policy perspective, I didn't know that was going to be a question, so I didn't have a chance to vet that part.
You're fine.
So I would say we can definitely check that out with our HR representative for January, but family and students, I'm actually okay with.
Okay, perfect. And then my next note that I have, that second line, act as an advocate for additional support at meetings, and it has meetings plural in the district. So my question is, can you change your advocate from meeting to meeting? And then also I want to incorporate Greg's thoughts of, can you have more than one advocate? And I am fine if we want to limit that to special education related meetings, so it doesn't get overwhelming. But what are your thoughts?
So typically when we think about the advocate conversation, again, great question, it's hard because, multiple people start talking, multiple people start advocating, and now who's the representative? Because that's who I'm going to respond to,
Yep.
Or that's who we should respond to. It's no different if everyone is here advocating for one student. I would take questions from one who's leading that group. And so I guess that's kind of how I would like to see it, because it does make it hard if it's multiple people.
So I think there's two questions there. So I'm completely fine with, except for is it just IEPs, Board Member Schneider?
Well, it'd
Or
be
any
IEP,
special
any
education
special
meeting?
ed.
Correct.
Well, and IEP-related meetings.
Okay.
So reevaluation, manifestation meetings, which are all IEP meetings.
So I
Perfect.
think that's two separate things, though, board member. One of the things from an IEP perspective, we know that they can have multiple advocates. That's already written into IEP policies, or state law. Let's just say it like that. So we can add that language to put it here, but they can have multiple advocates in general just based off of state law.
So two separate things. It sounds like everyone is comfortable with limiting it to one advocate unless it's an IEP-related meeting. So if we could build that specificity into the policy, I think that would be appropriate. And then my secondary question is, since it says meetings plural, could I have one advocate for this meeting, and then if I need to have a separate meeting on the same topic or a different situation altogether, can you change who your advocate is?
I personally am okay with that. Part of the space where this came out of in the spirit of this is also this understanding of when a person brings an advocate with them, that advocate is possibly privy to confidential information about, that parent's child. And so in that, we wanted both people to sign off that it's okay for the person I brought along for the administrator to say things in front of this advocate that are confidential about my child. And so to me, if they want to bring a different person the next time, that's fine, but then that person then needs to follow the process and everyone needs to sign off that. And that was in my conversation with our lawyer about what to do. That was really their recommendation.
No, that makes complete sense. So
Great.
just to be clear, and I want to make sure Ms. Shope has our appropriate notes. So advocates will be limited to one per meeting, except for IEP-related meetings, and advocates can change from meeting to meeting. All right, so those kinds of, and then if we move down to that second bullet point, it says the advocate must follow the agenda. I would like that to read all parties. Yeah, all parties must follow the agenda. And then my question with agenda, does the parent, guardian, student, or advocate, or in the additional policy that we're talking, employee, have the ability to help set the agenda? Because what I don't want to have is that the scope of the agenda is so narrow that the parent or guardian or advocate's true concern, there's no space for that to be addressed. I think that's just setting us up for failure.
So with agenda setting, typically from a school district's perspective, we want to, well, I'm just going to put it on the table, we will want to address the concern. Naturally, there's always going to, with advocates, this could be multiple things they want to address. And so there is going to have to be a partnership in that. And I think, so I understand what you're saying, but the partners, we still should be able to, as a school district, set the norms, or I believe we should, because again, I'm trying to be politically correct. From a advocate perspective, there could be multiple thoughts that they want to bring to the table, and that could be multiple agendas, but that's also taking multiple time. And so we have to be mindful of that too. That's why typically administration will set the agenda, and if we need to bring back additional conversations, we do that in a respectful manner. And the advocate should have something to say about, here's what we're talking about. I just don't think they should have complete control over the agenda. Yeah.
Okay. So I think the spirit of what we want to accomplish in that is, one, all parties must follow the agenda. And I think it would be prudent to say that the administration sets the agenda, but welcomes input from all involved parties. And so that way it's clear the administration sets the agenda, but we are going to be open to make sure that the needs, the reason for bringing this about are addressed, and we can hopefully reach resolution. Is everyone comfortable with that? All right. Committee members, is there anything that I've missed from this policy that we want to offer notes to the administration before we come back and take action at our January 4th meeting? All right, I'm going to take your silence to mean that we are good. So Dr. Garrison, you and your team will make public, staff, families aware that there is this opportunity. And we did this with our athletic and activities policy, and it worked really well. We set aside an hour, but we just had one email come in. So what we did is we set the time from 5:40 to 6:40. We read the email, and then we continued with the agenda. But if someone comes in and wants to share a perspective, we automatically pause, we receive that feedback, and then we move forward. And then we won't take action until that time has expired. Is everyone comfortable with that? All right, perfect. Ms. Shope, do you need me to repeat anything or anything additional for me on that? Okay. Thank you so much, everyone. All right, that brings us to our wellness policy, and we'll begin with our presentation. So I yield the floor.
First, I would like to say thank you to our presenters around our wellness policy. This is my, again, I joke when I say it, 18th day, and then, of course, we have this awesome policy that's in front of us. There's a lot that's in this policy, naturally, that we have to work through. There's going to be some questions, naturally, that we'll probably all have. I must say that I was over the wellness policy in my two districts ago, and I kind of understand some of the things that are in it, and I also have some questions about some of the things that are in it. Naturally, again, we believe this is an awesome opportunity for us to kind of, focus on the wellness of all of our staff and students. Hopefully, we'll also be able to, work through our questions. And again, thank you for presenting this information with us tonight.
So I'm Dawn Smith, and I am the Food Service Director for the School District of Beloit. This is quite a few wellness policies that I've had to do since I've been here. So we were very lucky because we did our assessment, and I would like to introduce Jill Camber-Davidson from the Rock County Health Department, who stepped in and said, hey, I want to facilitate this for the district and work through it because she's done several. So I'm going to go ahead and let her present her slide here.
Thank you, Dawn. Good evening, board members and superintendent new to the job. Welcome. Just to talk a little bit about wellness policies tonight, and this I wanted to do a little bit in terms of just background information. We know that healthier students do better in school. You know, kids that eat breakfast, kids that have healthy food, they have better attendance, they have better test scores, they're more engaged in school. And that actually has some of the impetus behind the wellness policies. When they originally were put into play, our Surgeon General noticed that the newest recruits coming into the military were not fit and did not pass the fitness tests that the military had in line. So it's something needs to change. And they were looking at our students as a way to make those changes. And that was early 2000s when that was going in place, and actually in the 2004 WIC Reauthorization Act, which is the Women's, Infants, and Children's Nutrition Act, they put in some wellness policies. Since then, it has grown to become something as part of what USDA has taken over with the school food reauthorization. So we have seen several just changes with it. 2010 was a big one with the Healthy Hunger Free Kids Act. And then we had the final rule in 2016 that actually put into place what you are seeing today. In terms of the wellness policy, and what we did as a committee is that we looked at what is recommended from the Department of Public Instruction. Wisconsin does not have a template or model wellness policy. Every school district comes up with their own. So the Department of Public Instruction put some guidance together, and that's actually what you see in the presentation. On page 3, I start off talking about the different things that are required. So for example, policy leadership is required to be specified in the wellness policy. So what you have before you, you have the old policy, I think is that in red?
Yes, I believe so.
The old policy is in red, and then all the new changes are in green. So if you go through and look at, on pages 1 and 2, we talk about the designated officials for oversight of the wellness policy are the district's director of food and nutrition and the district superintendent. At least one of the officials shall convene the wellness committee and lead the review, updating, and evaluation of the policy. So in that case, we are meeting what the Department of Public Instruction asked us to do in terms of leadership.
Please forgive me, I'm going to interrupt you. Ms. Shope, could we get the PowerPoint projected on the screen? Would that be helpful for your presentation?
It might be easier than me trying to tell you pages.
Thank you.
While she's doing that, I'm just going to go on a little bit. One of the points is food sold outside of the school meal program. So these are things that are not part of the breakfast, not part of the lunch program. And any food that is sold outside of that school meal program must meet the same criteria as the school meal program, and that is the smart snacks in school. And we have language in the policy that says all food and beverages sold outside of the school meal program shall meet USDA smart snack standards. Pretty straightforward, just meeting that one. There also is a provision for foods offered or provided but not sold. So this is looking at food that is given to students as rewards or classroom parties or different types of snacks if things are, and this I do need to say, this is what the district gives to students. This is not what a student brings in their lunch. We are not going to look at what a student is bringing in. If they bring in their own snack or they bring in lunch, that doesn't apply under this policy. And our language here just says all foods and beverages offered on the school campus meet or exceed the USDA Smart Snacks nutrition standards, including those provided at celebrations and classroom parties, where food items are brought in by staff and family members. And that is, again, brought in for the share for the entire classroom, not for that one student's consumption. All foods provided to students during the school day must either be a fresh fruit or vegetable, have an ingredient label, or be provided by the food service management company. This ensures allergy precautions and our food safety is maintained. With the growing amount of allergies we have in our students, it is very challenging for the classroom teacher and the nurse to try to determine what sort of snack a child may have if you don't have the ingredient label. And the other concern is that if a district has the policy that, oh, if snacks brought in you can't eat, you need to go to the nurse and get something different. And to me, that is something that is not equitable for all students, because if we're saying to one student, you can't have what Joey brought in because you're allergic, and you have to go to the nurse and get something else, To me, that is really not fair to that poor student with the allergy. They should be able to partake with what everybody else is having in the classroom. So we're looking at things, again, the fresh fruit and vegetables, or a label that way, that we can really make a decision and be smart about it. Because the last thing we want is for one of our students to end up with a code with a food allergy reaction. And then food rewards and incentives shall not be used to encourage student achievement. Whenever possible, low and no-cost rewards that reinforce healthy habits are encouraged. Food and beverage marketing, and this is on page 4 of the policy. School food authorities may only market products that adhere to Smart Snacks guidelines. And the Department of Public Instruction says that the districts develop these guidelines related to marketing that are, so they have stricter than the Smart Snacks is allowed. And what we put in the policy is the promotion, marketing, and advertising of food products on district property is restricted by USDA's nutrition standards for all foods sold in school, or the Smart Snacks guidelines. School administration, that is the principal or their designee, will restrict and enforce food and beverage marketing in their building to only those foods and beverages that meet the nutrition standards set forth by the Smart Snacks rule. Marketing includes brand names, trademarks, logos, or tags on equipment, posters, garbage and recycling containers, display cases, and signage. And product labels are not marketing. Nutrition education, it must be included at a minimum one goal for nutrition education in our policy. And we actually spell out a policy here in terms of influence students' lifelong eating behaviors. So looking at school as a lifelong learning process, one of those goals is to get students to develop some healthy eating behaviors while they are in school. So hopefully by the time they graduate, they will have a sense in terms of what things are healthy, is the goal. Slide 13 is nutrition promotion. And this is districts must, at a minimum, set a goal for nutrition promotion. And this is really what the school food service and they are doing to promote school meals and promoting breakfast. So this may be some things like posters up in the lunchroom or the Harvest of the Month program or different ways to promote healthy eating with the school meals. And the policy states the district is committed to providing a school environment that promotes students to practice healthy eating and physical activity. Students shall receive consistent nutrition messages that promote health throughout schools, classrooms, cafeterias, and the school media. Physical activity is also included in the policy, and again, all districts must include one goal for physical activity. And if you look at the policy that's before you, there's actually several goals. One is looking at developmentally and age-appropriate, grade-appropriate opportunities to engage in physical activity. And then physical activity during the school day shall not be withheld as punishment. So this is looking at the fact that we don't keep kids in for recess if they've been misbehaving. And many times, the child who's misbehaving is the one who needs recess the most. So it's looking at instead some types of positive behavioral supports that we can work and not have to take away their recess. Other strategies for wellness, we're looking at school-based strategies, and we have several of these in our policy. And the one I really want to point out is social, emotional, and mental health. This is something that is actually not required by USDA. It's something that the district wellness committee thought was really important to put in here, that students have access to credentialed school counselors and psychologists who provide support and assistance in making healthy decisions, managing emotions, and coping with crisis. I actually think this is something that's going to be coming out in a lot of other district policies as well, because student mental health is real important right now. And we learned through the pandemic that our students need more supports than we, I think, realized before that. So putting that in the policy here is really making a statement how important it is for our students' mental health. Other activities in here is the district supports the implementation of other programs that help create a school environment that conveys consistent wellness. And this is really just opening it up for in terms of other programs that may come along, that we're open to looking at different things that support good health. Staff wellness is another one that's put on here for a strategy for wellness. So it's looking at what sort of things we offer for staff in terms of stress relief, flu shots. Some people have like a Weight Watchers at Work program or other things that may be through their HR and through their health insurance as well. The other piece of the policy is updating and informing the public. So this is really your community engagement piece with this policy, that the public knows it exists, they know what things are there, and there's several bullet points looking at this policy. One is working with community partners to support district wellness, encouraging schools to partner with families and communities to enhance student health and learning. The district will work with parents and community to provide a family-focused health promotion event, health fair, or other wellness-themed open house each year. And the district invites public involvement in its wellness policy review and implementation process. And the last slide actually talks about the triennial assessment. And this was a new piece in the final rule, that every 3 years, a district must evaluate, review, and monitor their wellness policy and say, what did we do these past 3 years? And did we do what we said we were going to do? And that's really the big piece in here. So in this case, putting this policy in place now sets the district up for a good triennial assessment because they have this policy in place. They can look at what's happening and looking at some assessments that they can move forward. And one of those programs to put in place is looking at school health councils or SHACs. And that is each school will have its own wellness council, and then they'll have a representative to the wellness committee. So this will allow for more localized type wellness activities. So for example, the wellness fair that was mentioned earlier, you might have an open house or something, and they would have something to do with wellness at the open house. Or you have a physical activity fair, or you do some other types of a fun run or something else that you can do, and that would count as that event and be captured in the triennial assessment as well. So that is pretty much the policy in terms of what we did and what the reasons behind all these changes that were there, because it looks like a lot, but being very comprehensive makes it very easy on the other end when it's time for your assessment, because you can just check those boxes and say, this is all done. And this is something that we like this way. I do want to point out that some of the policy type things, the language is the floor. That is, what is written in there is the minimum. And districts can be stricter if you want to be on any of these things, but right now, some of these we looked at what is the reasonable thing to do, and what are things that are happening in the district already. Because many of these things are happening, and you're not being recognized because they're not in a policy. No one knows they're happening. So I think this would be a great thing to put into place and really celebrate some of the great things that you guys are doing in terms of wellness. So I don't know if there's questions.
So I think the questions may fluctuate between the presentation because it mirrors so much of the policy. So I just wanted to say that up front. And if everyone doesn't mind, it would help me if we look at the structure of the personnel needed to implement this policy, and then kind of phase 2, go into the details in the context of the policy. Is that okay with my committee members? All right. So just a few things. And what I did is I went through the policy and I pulled directly from the language just to get an idea of how things are set up. And then with that in mind, I reviewed the context of the policy. So that's just kind of how my brain works. So my goal in this is to kind of make sure we're on the same page with the structure. So when we go through the policy, I'm hopeful that edits will be easier. All right. So the first part of policy says that the wellness policy leadership, it will include the director of food and nutrition and the superintendent. Is that the intent, or would you like to have or designees? And if yes, would that be for both of those positions or just the superintendent? And we want to make sure we keep the director of food and nutrition. What's the preference?
So first of all, again, thank you for the presentation and another great question, Board Member Levy. For me, typically when I see these policies, there's always a superintendent or his designee. The designee typically shifts to, in this case, the health and, food services manager. Is it manager or coordinator? I'm sorry.
Director.
Director. My apologies.
That's right.
Director. It normally shifts to the director, and at that point, there's a team that's put together. And then from there, it kind of, branches.
We're going to get to that.
Got
So I'm just going to take a step by step. So the way the policy currently reads, like I said, it's the director of food and nutrition and the superintendent. You have both of those. So would you like to keep it as the director of food and nutrition and the superintendent or designee? Are you comfortable with that language?
Or designee.
Okay, perfect. So I'm just going to make note of that, and then when we review the policy, we'll make those edits as appropriate. So the next person that's listed in the policy, and I'll just go through the person or the teams, and then we'll come back and look at responsibilities. So the next person is the site coordinator, and this is at each school, you'll have a site coordinator. Is that accurate?
Correct.
All right. And then there's also a wellness committee, and that's at the district level, and it looks like it can include staff, community members, et cetera.
That would be at the site level, right?
There's not a
Yeah. Oh, it
wellness
is a
committee
district.
at
Okay.
every building.
Oh, yeah.
The wellness
Okay.
committee
Sorry.
is
Yep.
district
Yes.
level.
Yep, you're right.
Okay? All right. And then the committee has a council. So I just want to make sure that was accurate. So each building has a site coordinator. At the district level, there's the wellness committee, and then the committee has a council called the School Health Advisory Council. And is that at every building? Every building has a shack?
So now, yes, yeah.
Okay,
Can I add something to that?
absolutely.
Sure. So, typically, we also got to think about what's doable in the wellness and the committee. And so, with just a little bit of experience working with these, and I didn't get a chance to share this with the team, but I would prefer to see, of course, the committee members be a part of the district. I'm sorry, the leads in the building become part of the district committee, and then the council. I didn't have that in my previous because again it's more
is it
people.
necessary?
It actually adds more responsibilities, and I want to make sure we're able to do something that we said we're going to do. And so if every building had a person that comes to the committee, and then the committee represents the entire district, that to me gives a little more leeway to making this work.
I actually absolutely agree with that, but let's just go through as it's currently written, because then we're going to know what adjustments we need to make. So just to recap, we have the policy leadership, which is now going to read the Director of Food and Nutrition and the superintendent or designee. There's a site coordinator at every building. There's a wellness committee at the district level. The committee has a council, which is the shack, and then each shack has a representative. So my question is, if someone could explain to me the difference between the site coordinator that's at every building and then the shack representative that's also at every building as it's currently written in the policy.
The site coordinator and the shack coordinator are one and the same. So the shack coordinator basically would be the rep for their building to the wellness committee.
Is there a reason they have two different names in the policy and it starts with the site coordinator and the shack isn't introduced until the end of the policy?
No, there is nothing that can be certainly changed that way.
Okay.
And that's what I was noting, that the site coordinators, typically in a lot of buildings when we're coming to the policy, buildings can also run wellness things in their building, right? And so there's normally a group of folk, not only the site coordinator, but there's normally a group of folk in the building that can come together and say, I want to do wellness things for the staff, for the students. And then that site coordinator could also be a part of the district committee as well. So then we think about us as a whole. And so again, I understand what you are referencing, Board Member Levy, that there's almost two in the same.
Correct. And that's why I wanted to get the personnel straight, because we'll know how to edit the policy. So we're all on the same page. The site coordinator and the shack representative are the same person. So do you want that language to be consistent as shack representative? All right, then Ms. Shope, just a note, when we get to the actual policy review, we're gonna need to introduce the shack at the beginning of the policy, so it'll make sense who this person is and what we're referencing. So we have the wellness policy leadership, we have the wellness committee, which is district level, and then, just to be clear, that's district level, but each building has the shack. All right, and then each shack has a representative who also sits on the wellness committee.
Correct.
All right, I got it. Other committee members, you good with kind of the org chart of this? Perfect. All right. Responsibilities, and then we can get to the policy and see how much we can get through we have 41 minutes. All right. So under site coordinator, which is now SHAC representative, ensures compliance with the policy and will report to the committee. Let me back up. It'll make more sense. So the wellness committee, as it's listed in policy now, and I just want to make sure we want to keep all of this, meets annually to do the following: review, update, and evaluate the wellness policy, review nutrition and physical activity policies. So my first question is, have we identified which policies those are? If not, that's okay. But we need that information so we can cross-reference at the bottom of the policy.
Yeah, it is cross-referenced in
At
the
the very
actual,
last page.
at the last page.
Okay, so everything's included? Perfect. And then direct the action plans for the upcoming year. Who's writing those action plans? Is that the SHAC representative? Is that the SHAC council that resides at each building?
So typically, do you mind me jumping in? Oh, sure. So typically, I know this is your presentation as well. I want to support as needed. But typically, the plans are written prior to the beginning of the school year at the district level. The committee level.
The
which is
wellness committee?
The wellness committee, correct. Because
Okay.
we want to lay out our expectations for the year as early as we possibly can. In my previous opportunity, that's kind of the way I did it. We brought everybody together in the summertime. We talked about kind of things we want to do, and then we moved those themes to the building. So those goals could be done possibly in the summer, brought back to the building, and kind of moved from there.
Okay, so I'm just making notes. Everyone on the same page, that that will be the responsibility. The wellness committee will keep that there, and that's a summer activity.
Summer, correct.
Perfect. And then one question I have for clarity. So annually, prepare a report on policy implementations to the full board. So two things. One, the way our committees are structured, kind of the in the weeds work happens at the committee level and then it goes to the full board. So if we could adjust the language to the wellness committee will prepare a report on policy implementation to the policy committee, and then we'll send it to the full board. But then also the language in the policy says that that triannually, so every 3 years, the board will make policy adjustments. So it just seemed a little awkward to me. If you are presenting eventually to the full board after you've gone through the policy committee every year, do we want to specify that 2 of those are for information only? And then the third one is for policy edits, although later in the policy, it says you'll make policy recommendations annually.
Correct. So I think the wellness committee has typically always been a working committee. And so there's always going to be changes. Just be honest with you, there are going to be changes as it pertains to the needs of our staff. And so if we see that whatever we have here needs some adjustment, we as a committee should be able to bring that to the board and say, well, here's what we're thinking as it pertains to possible adjustments. Now, as it pertains to making the presentation, typically we would do that in May, but it's up to the board, determine when we want to do that, because going into the summer is when we want to set our goals again, right? So we make the presentation to the board in May, possibly bring recommendations to any changes, which we want to see it through naturally, and then, of course, move forward with any new things in the summer as a team. So I want to make sure I answered your question, Board Member Levy.
One other piece with that, in terms of the 3-year piece, is also looking at how the policy compares to a model policy. So there are different assessment pieces that you look at in terms of a scoring process and a model policy, and that is one of the things that's every 3 years, because doing it every year would be overkill.
Okay, so just to make sure that we're in sync, so the committee is reporting to the board every year on policy adjustments, but they don't want the board to take action every year on policy adjustments or recommendations.
It would depend on what it is, that's the question, because if something changed, like with the USDA ruling, and we needed to move it through, that would come forward. But the triannual assessment piece, the 3 years, is when you need to have your policy compared to a national standard, and then have that available for, and it basically it's for the food service review, part of that.
And we just did that.
So perfect. So I think when we get to the policy, if we can just specify that triennial review is for the purpose that you just stated, and then the policy recommendation and edits will be on an as-needed basis. All right.
We typically want to bring, as stated, ideas from the USDA or whatever that needs to change to the group, and that's the information that we want to make sure you have when we're making those changes. As you know, nutrition changes kind of frequently. And so those are the only changes that, in my mind, that we would necessarily be bringing to you. The rest of the stuff is locked in once the board agrees to the policy itself. That makes sense?
No, it does. I just wanted to make sure that the language reflected what we expect our practice to be, so we're compliant.
Okay, so I just want to make sure we get what you're asking for. So you want to make sure that when we bring our triangle conversation to you on the third year, on year 3, that so we wouldn't bring changes yearly to the board unless it's something from the USDA. That's what I want to make sure we're clear with.
I agree.
And I'm fine with whatever is most appropriate. I'm just responding to how the policy is currently written. Because the way, and we're going to get to it in just a minute, but the policy is currently written that the Wellness Committee is going to bring policy recommendations to the board annually. And then separately, there's the triennial review about how things are going, how we compare to that model policy. So those are 2 separate issues. So I'm just trying to get, is that what you want? Is that the intent that and it's fine if we review the policy annually. I wanted clarity because it wasn't clear in the language.
We would only need to review the policy annually if there's a USDA major change.
I agree.
And so that's how.
Perfect. So I'm just going to put in the notes as needed.
Yeah.
Perfect. All right. Committee members, any other questions on the structure or the roles before we dive into the policy? All right. Yeah, go ahead.
The one question that I did have was in the second paragraph under wellness policy leadership. Toward is the second sentence from the end. It says the board will adopt and revise policies based on the committee recommendations. Almost sounds like if the committee makes a recommendation, the board has to accept that. And since the board is the only one that can actually set policy, I would maybe rephrase that sentence to saying the board will strongly consider the committee recommendations when adopting or revising wellness policy.
Yeah, and we're going to jump into the policy, Brenda, but if I don't get to that, please unmute and yell. All right, so we're ready to start with the green wording. So anything from that last paragraph on the first page or that second page, I'm just going to say the page that starts with a wellness policy leadership header. Board Member Schneider, were there any other things you wanted us to pay attention to? And we're just going to take it one page at a time.
That is the only thing
Okay.
on page 2.
Perfect. Board Member Anderson, anything for the tail end of page 1 or that next page that you had any questions, comments, or edits?
On my notes, I didn't actually write down the page. Forgot to do that, but I think it is mentioned in this first part that we're looking at. So, like when we have outside food being brought in, that was it?
Not yet. Can you hold that until we get to it? Because I don't want to confuse Ms. Shope with our edits.
All right, because
I think that's further. It starts with talking about the structure.
okay. I might be jumping ahead of them, but
No, if I don't stop and loop you in with outside food, please make sure you go ahead and unmute. So if we're just looking at the bottom of that first page and then that second page entitled Wellness Policy Leadership, I just have notes and questions. We'll just run through them. The School Wellness Committee, Dr. Garrison, I just want to confirm, is this a year-round committee?
Yes.
Okay. And then the district employees that are serving on the committee, is there an addendum for that year-round work? How will that be handled?
Typically, the year-round work is determined at the building level. Naturally, we wouldn't go outside of what the policy gives us, permission to do. And when you say addendum, are you saying where would that work be housed? I'm sorry.
How it's going to be financed? Because I'm assuming we're not asking, these are additional duties for our employees, and I'm assuming we're not asking them to volunteer. I could be wrong, but are we?
So typically, and again, we can do what we can do. I would say this is typically a volunteer opportunity at the building level. However, if there's possibilities for pay to run that committee, that's something that we could explore. And so I don't want to say it will be for pay versus if we have the money, yes. If we don't, then it would have to be a volunteer opportunity.
Okay, just jotting down notes. Thank you, sir.
And just with other districts I've worked with, if they have their plan in place in May, they have a meeting in June before school's up, kind of stuff. July is off, and then we get back together in August when people come back to staff before school starts. So we kind of mirror the calendar that way and just say, okay, you get a break.
So more of a 9-month commitment to estimate it?
Maybe more like 10, but.
Okay,
Yeah.
got it.
Because typically, like you mentioned, May, June is the work
Yeah.
presentation time frame. July is, typically off, and then August we start back with, hey, the committee comes back together.
Because one thing is important is putting this wellness policy like in your student handbooks. So having that ready to go before school's out, so when you guys approve student handbooks and stuff for the next school year, the policy is there.
Okay, so if we're starting with that first sentence under wellness policy leadership, it says at a minimum, schools/districts must establish. Since we're just referring to our specific district, is everyone okay if we omit /districts?
Well, I would probably want to keep it the same, keep it together because we have to get representation in the schools, right? And if we don't get representation in the schools, then a conglomerate can still have representation at the district level. I'll probably want to keep both schools /districts.
So what are the multiple districts we're referring to with because this is a wellness policy for the school district of Beloit, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
So what are the multiple districts that would be referenced in this policy?
So I see the S there. You should definitely take the S off because it is just one district, but we are made up of multiple schools.
Right.
So what we want to say?
I was going to drop districts and say schools because the district is the schools. But if you feel strongly, we can just drop the S on district. Do you have a preference?
I would say at a minimum, the district must establish wellness policy if we was to take away one of them.
Perfect. So we will drop schools, Ms. Shope, and say the district, and we'll make that singular. If we move down, the designated officials for oversight of the wellness policy are the district's director of food and nutrition and the district superintendent or designee. So we want to make sure we include that. And then one of the officials or designee, so you can have flexibility there. Dr. Garrison shall convene. And then again, if we go down to the next line, updating and evaluation of the policy on an annual basis, updating and evaluation of the policy as needed. And then Ms. Shope, just yell if you need me to slow down. Okay. Just a side note, if you could look into how difficult it would be sometimes I've seen policy reviews and they have the line numbers That would be amazing if that's just a quick fix, because then I can say, oh, line 16. So the sentence that's in the middle of that first paragraph that says, at least one of the officials shall convene the wellness committee and lead the review, updating, and evaluation of the policy as needed. And actually lead recommendations, or review and recommendations for updating the policy, to get to Board Member Schneider's point, that they are recommendations. And then the next sentence, each school shall designate a site coordinator. So that's why we started with the structure first. We need to bring in, so that's gonna be the SHAC representative. All right, so Ms. Shope, if we go down to the very end of the policy, where the last section says implementation, monitoring, and evaluation of the wellness process, we may want to rename it because it seems odd to start with implementation and wellness, and we haven't introduced what the party is. And I am always open for suggestions, but we can't reference the SHAC representative before we explain what the SHAC representative is. And as I'm thinking about it, Ms. Shope, can you just pull that sentence and put a pin in it? Because we need to explain the wellness committee first. So if you could pull the sentence as the designated officials for the oversight of the wellness policy, no correction, each school shall designate, that should be a SHAC representative who shall ensure compliance with the policy. And then the designee will report to the committee on a quarterly basis. If you can just pull and pin that, then I think it makes sense. And then also 1 through 7 would go with that. If we then pick up with explaining what the wellness committee is. Does that make sense?
So, am I moving that part?
Yep, but we haven't determined where it's gonna land yet, but just pull it and pin it. And so each school shall designate all the way through number 7 is kind of off to the side for now. So we'll pick up with a wellness committee. And then we get specific. So that second line says the committee shall meet at least 3 times during the school year to discuss the implementation and the established activities and address barriers or challenges. Are we fine with the specificity that's laid out? That's something that's practical? You are perfectly fine. For anyone watching at home, Dr. Garrison is being an absolute gentleman. He's moving our presenters to the table and relocating the mic so they can sit while they respond. So we will gladly pause for that.
Can you please?
Absolutely. So just to give some context, I am a true believer that our policy needs to be precise so we know when we are in compliance and when we are out of compliance, and we can govern ourselves accordingly. So I just want to confirm, are you all comfortable with the specificity of the committee, which I guess we should note on there, Ms. Shope, that sometimes the wellness committee is referred to as the committee, so it'll make sense as we go through the policy. The committee shall meet at least 3 times during the school year to discuss the implementation of the established activity and address any barriers or challenges. We're fine with that level of specificity?
Yes.
Perfect. And that's during the school year, so that precludes any summer work. That can happen, but that doesn't count to the at least 3. And then as we travel down in the policy, in addition, the committee shall meet annually to review the nutrition And then if we go down to the next sentence, prepare a report on policy implementation for the Board of Education, that plan should actually go to the policy committee first, and then the policy committee will pass it on to the full board. And then again, following our same practice of how we use our committees, the committee shall report annually to the policy committee and the Board of Education. So we'll make sure that's scheduled appropriately. Ms. Shope, stop me at any time. If we go down to the last sentence before the bolded area, again, just want to confirm we're okay with the specificity. At a minimum, the wellness policy will be reviewed and updated at least triannually by the District Board of Education. And if I'm understanding the way you described it, the policy review and kind of the program evaluation are two separate things. Is that accurate?
The policy review, again, we'll always be reviewing the policy based off of the recommendations that comes from the state level or the government level. The second part of your question, the evaluation of the program, I think we're, again, always doing because we're working through it.
But
do you
doesn't
want that, do you want that at the board level?
So here's my question before I give a preference is I see, and correct me if I'm wrong, I see it as two separate issues. One, there's policy review related to the program and implementation, and then there's the overall evaluation of the program. And it sounds like that overall evaluation and then comparing it to the standard, that needs to happen triannually.
That's correct.
But the policy just needs to happen as needed. And right now, the two things are conflated. So I just want to make sure that the policy is clear and it's true to the spirit of what we want the practice to be.
I agree.
All right. So what I would recommend that at a minimum, the wellness policy, or just say, take out the at a minimum. The wellness policy will be, I'm thinking as I'm speaking, which is typically not a good idea. Because policy is going to be dealt with, I think that we should reword this to specify the program evaluation. At a minimum, the wellness program evaluation will be reviewed at least triannually by the Board of Education. And that review of the program can come directly to the board. It's just the policy that needs to come to the committee. Is everyone comfortable with that clarification? All right, Ms. Shope,
Can
do
we-
I need, yep.
Well, let me add this then.
Please.
Then I would like to have the triannual meeting in May. Let's be specific
Okay.
about that
Yep.
too. A lot of times it gets left off, and then it's like, okay, where did it come from, or why
Yep.
didn't we do it? So, if we do it in May, I'm sorry for mispronouncing this word right now. The triangle. Say it again.
Triennial.
Thank you. Triennial.
We know what you're talking
Okay,
about.
thank you. The tri meeting we should definitely have in May of the school year.
I love it, and that helps with calendaring.
right.
Okay. Ms. Shope, you need me to repeat? Is that what the hand up meant?
I just want to verify,
Absolutely.
at first you said scratch at a minimum, and then you re-added it back in, so is at a minimum staying?
We can leave at a minimum because it says at least triannually. So that, I hate being redundant, so if we can streamline, I'm always in favor of that. And instead of the wellness policy, the evaluation of the wellness program will be reviewed at least triennially by the District Board of Education.
Are you taking out and updated?
Yes, because the review will dictate if an update needs to happen. I don't want to automatically assume or, place that in if it doesn't need to be there. Thank you for asking that.
And then I have one other quick one.
Absolutely.
Back up above, where you're talking about the normal chain of how we do policy and policy sends to the board.
Yep.
Do you want that spelled out in each of those sentences, that it will go to the policy committee, who will then,
Just say, and then to the full board. Yep, keep it simple. And that'll be the 2 spots. So wherever, the 2 places just above that where it says for the Board of Education. So when it talks about the action plan, so the action plan should come to the policy committee first and then to the full board. Yep. No, thank you. Okay, those bullet points are fine. Nutrition standards for all foods, I didn't have any adjustments with. Standards and guidelines. So under standards and guidelines, and then I'm going to yield the floor to committee members, and I know we have 5 minutes left, so I'm mindful of that. One of the bullet points, kind of halfway through, says all school campuses are closed, meaning that no students are permitted to leave the school grounds during the school day. Is there a reason for that?
I think this is a conversation that I haven't had a chance to actually kind of delve into yet. During COVID, there was different rules. Let's just put it on the table as such. We were trying to think about mitigating the spread of the disease. And I think as a school district, and I could be wrong, but as a school district, we allow students to leave for lunch. That's kind of what I'm under as I'm seeing things, let's say it like that. I don't know if I'm at the mindset as it stands that kids should not be able to leave for lunch. And that's kind of where I am at the current time. I'd rather be fully transparent than not.
No, and where I'm coming from is keep it simple. Unless there's a specific reason that's not obvious for me for why that's in there, I think we remove it, and that's a separate issue that can be handled however you best see fit. But is there a specific reason that's included? If no, I would recommend we just omit it.
I would recommend we omit it, and if we need to bring it back to the policy committee, and then later to the board, we can do such.
Perfect.
As needed.
All right.
Because again, let me just backtrack a little bit.
Yeah, go ahead.
Typically, when that statement is there, it's really meant for upper level students because middle school and elementary students aren't, hopping on their bikes and running down to the store. And so, to me, when we start to isolate certain groups, then the policy then starts to direct itself in a different manner. So that's kind of the reason why I wanted to make that statement. Thank you.
No problem. Just took me back to a childhood memory. All right. So let me back up for the remainder of that page, and forgive me, I got a little bit ahead of myself. So we're still on the page. We're at the point that says school meal program participation through the end of just that page, so we can keep our edits clear. Board Member Schneider, any edits or questions on that portion of the policy?
No, nothing for that section.
Okay, Board Member Anderson, same question.
You actually asked the question I had was about the open campus or closed campus requirement on there.
Okay, all right. So under school meal program participation, if we could, and this is small, but the first bullet starts with the district shall notify parents. If we could be consistent and say the district shall explore instead of just starting the bullet with shall explore. So if we can make that change, and then I don't have anything else until we get down to food offered or provided, not sold. That first bullet point, my question is, because I don't like having policy where it's not clear of how it's enforced. So just something for us to think about before we adopt these edits, and I'll read it in case people don't have the policy in front of them. All foods and beverages offered on the school campus meet or exceed the USDA Smart Snack Nutrition Standard, including those provided at celebrations and classroom parties where food items are brought in by staff/family members. How is that being enforced? Because if the onus is on me as a building leader to enforce that, I just want to make sure that people are notified of what the new expectations are.
I think that's a great question. Typically, what we see in most school districts is that this information is shared with parents prior to the beginning of the school year. Most people, I say most people, adhere to that rule. But then, of course, there's always going to be people who didn't get the email, who didn't get the information, and they come with their kids' birthday treats, right? And then we run into that whole conversation. I think we need to be a community of uplifting, and if that is the case, then we need to. For me, I always think if I didn't know and I brought it for my child was expecting it, how would that make me feel as a parent? And so I still feel like we have to have some.
But balancing that against health concerns.
It's always tough. I get it.
And then does that fall on the classroom teacher? If yes, we just need to make them aware of that.
Correct. I believe at the end of the day, the classroom teacher could then determine. I'm sorry, building administration could then determine how the classroom teacher should operate, because the building administration should be the ones to determine. Okay, well, you know what? Thank you, ma'am. Here now you have this information, and I know you didn't get it last time. We'll receive it this time, but please know that we don't take treats moving forward.
Or they have to have an ingredient level. Somebody has a nut allergy. I don't know, you made it with almond oil, and now I have a student in crisis.
Right. And that's where it gets a little hard and convoluted, because then if you don't have a nurse online or a nurse to go back and pull up all this information about what this class can and can't have, it just makes it difficult. Typically, what we then ask parents to do is we ask them to, take the treat back home.
Yeah.
And that's typically what we would do. Again, sometimes it gets a little emotional for parents who just didn't know. And just I'm an open conversation type of superintendent, so that's just kind of how I'm thinking in general about the parent if they didn't know. When they do know, then you don't bring it.
Right. So what I think would be helpful, and we've talked about this before, but unfortunately it was never executed. So we have the policy, and it's as clear as possible, and we kind of account for as much as we can reasonably predict or expect. But then there's also a space in board docs for admin regs. And those regulations kind of go into, because we wouldn't include all of that in policy, but it gives admin, teaching staff, okay, this is what the policy says, but what does that mean for my day-to-day life, and how am I making sure that I'm compliant with the policy? So if the team could, on the back end, and those, I need to double check. I don't think those need to be approved by the board, but they might. You're shaking your head no, I don't think so. But just make sure that those are there so people have the tools they need to respond, one, consistently, and then two, appropriately.
I think what we never typically would do, and please correct me if I'm wrong, we would typically say, here are some healthy snack options for a classroom treat. And we would list those options for parents, or don't bring anything is the other side of it. Typically, when parents know that, they typically fall into that category. They'll bring, let's say, apples or oranges or, celery sticks, whatever it is, as a healthy snack. Is when they don't know it is when we get into this gray area. And I don't want it to be a gray area anymore, so that's why I would like to say we should, if it's not a healthy snack, then it stops at the door. It's returned home. That's what I would typically do.
Yep.
But we would do it in a nice way.
Oh, always. Okay, so we have found ourselves at 6:42. I love policy so much and getting into the weeds. So here's the thing. We are going to postpone everything else that remains on our agenda and put that on the January 4th meeting. Thank you, Ms. Shope. We're also going to add policy 811 just so we can review that with 811.1 and coming attraction 811.2 to address employees with respect to advocacy. Thank you so much for coming out. I hate to create so I'm gonna put this in the air. You don't need to respond. Talk to our wonderful superintendent. If you are available, we would love to have you come back if we have questions as we finish the review of this policy for the January 4th. And if you need to connect or you're able to connect virtually, that will work as well. So don't commit now because as my mother would say, I'm jumping in your day. But we would welcome you back because I think it's really great to talk to the people who are generating the policy and make sure that we have the intent correct. All right. So with that being said, that brings us to our next meeting date, which is going to be Wednesday, January 4th, 2023. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second?
All right, there is a motion and second. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
All right, that motion passes unanimously. Thank you so much, everyone.